The moment I began learning about design patterns was the moment something clicked in my head regarding solving problems. Hi, I have an idea to explore all popularized design patterns by the Gang of Four, but without an introduction to the topic, this would feel incomplete. Thus, I will provide an introduction to the potential series. Design patterns are, in my honest opinion, one of the most important topics in software engineering. If you ever had a feeling that you are solving a problem someone already solved, or even worse, you already solved, then your feeling is probably right, and this is design deja vu. So, what exactly is a design pattern? In simplest terms, it is a description of a problem that appears often in the environment and the direct solution for such case. Yet, it is not a ready-for-use piece of code that you simply paste, but rather a half-baked idea that you need to finish in your own system's ON and adjust to your own needs. They allow us, developers, projecting on a higher level of abstraction and create a common language between programmers. Most of the patterns we will talk about come from a legendary book by Erich Gamma, Richard Helm, Ralph Johnson, and John Willisides, who are already mentioned, Gang of Four. What is important to mention is that these authors identified those patterns and described them while observing countless OOP systems. They described them by four essential elements: name, which becomes a new element of the project's vocabulary; problem, which we will solve; solution, abstract description of elements and their relation to each other that will create the solution; and consequences, pros and cons of the pattern. Before we get to the specific patterns, there are two important rules on which the whole book is based. First one is program an interface, not an implementation. This means objects should communicate and be manipulated via an interface which allows us to change internals without breaking the whole system. The second one is favor object composition over class inheritance, because inheritance is static, also often called white box reuse, meaning the parent's class internals are exposed. Composition, on the other hand, is black box reuse. We combine objects in the runtime part, which gives us way more freedom, and similarly to the first rule, leaves internals unexposed. Now we can get to pattern classification. We have three main categories. Creational, for the object creation process. They make the whole system independent of how they are created. For example, singleton, which guarantees that there is only one instance of the given class. Structural, for class composition and creating bigger structures. Here we can find an adapter which allows cooperation of classes with incompatible interfaces. Behavioral, they focus on algorithms and the responsibility given between objects. The example is an observer. It notifies other objects when one is changed. Yet, this is not the only book that discusses the topic of solving problems with patterns. We will also utilize some insights from Patterns of Enterprise Application Architecture by Martin Fowler, which gives a perspective on a solution creation in large corporate environments. He focuses more on the importance of layering and splits most systems into three main layers: presentation, handling interaction with the user; domain logic, the heart of the system where the business logic is located, data source, communication with databases and other systems, patterns from Gang of Four, like strategy or state, are often used for organizing complicated logic inside the domain logic layer of the solution. At the end, I have one warning and conclusion. Don't use patterns mindlessly, because they are not a purpose in themselves and ought to be used only when we need the elasticity they offer. Every new pattern is an additional dependency in code, and every new line of code in itself is a liability. Also, it doesn't mean that the chapter of describing patterns ended with the patterns book. The objectives of software and environment where it works change, and new problems arise not only on the domain logic and data source level, so we, as engineers, should have the whole image in mind when approaching those new challenges. Design patterns are like an experienced architect's book, filled with useful projects, or like an archetype in books. While the story may be completely new, tragic hero is a common figure, and similarly, as developers, we try not to reinvent the wheel each time and create software that will stand for a long time. I hope that for those new to the topic, this was an informative video, and for those experienced, it was a good reminder. Thank you for listening, and see you next month. Bye.